Okay.
Greetings to all the viewers. Welcome to this session titled Challenges to India, Border and Internal, presented by Tillotoma Foundation. This is Soham, Director of Tillotoma Foundation, and we are very glad that today's speaker is Colonel Ali Akhtar Jafri, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the SaveLife Foundation and former Vice President Operations of the Indian Army. Colonel Ali Akhtar Jafri is an alumnus of National Defense Academy and Indian Military Academy. He has done MSc in Weapons Technology from University of Pune. He also holds an MBA from Osmania University. He was part of the first Indian defense delegation to Uzbekistan on strategic consultation. He has been the Director of Operations and Security at Manipur. He has extensive experience in risk assessment, analysis, risk profiling, deterrence strategies, and leveraging technology to improve service levels for strategic assets. In today's session, India's threats at the border, as well as the internal crises and problems, will be discussed by Army veteran and social welfare management professional, Colonel Jafri. So over to Colonel Jafri.
Thank you. Thank you. At the outset, let me thank my host and Tillotoma Foundation for organizing this event and promoting the exchange of views on issues which are of national importance. So thank you, and thank you for having me here. These are troubled times, and when I say troubled times, Pakistan continues to make the Kashmir Valley simmer. When the dragon threatens Ladakh, when the Maoist insurgency seems to regroup, and even a good old friend like Nepal really takes an anti-India stance, if I may call. We cannot but just take note of these serious issues. And these are issues which are all concerning our borders. So I'm here today to speak to you about challenges that India faces on its borders and those that are faced internally within the country. Our Prime Minister, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, had once remarked famously that we can change friends, but not our neighbors. And this is a reality. Much as we may be at loggerheads with either our neighbors on the west or on the north, the fact doesn't change that they are our neighbors. Towards our west lies Pakistan, a country which is spawned due to the hatred that it had towards India. And that hatred became a central theme, a theme for its creation. The harder you could hate India, the better Pakistani you could be. We fought three wars. And another war at Kargil, if you can call that a full-fledged war. And Pakistan still continues to foment trouble for us. If you look at the statistics for Kashmir in terms of number of people, number of militants, or number of terrorists killed, the number has really been right up there. I mean, it's not really changed in the last 2-3 years. And as far as security forces personnel having been killed in the conflict in Kashmir, 95 security personnel were martyred in 2019. In 2018. In 2019, there were 78 deaths. And this year, 2020, just about 6 months down the line, we've already had 30 deaths. And, it goes on to show that the deaths of security forces and the corresponding deaths, corresponding killings of terrorists has really not varied much in number. Terrorist casualties or terrorists, being killed in that area was 271 in 2018. In 2019, it dipped to 163. But this year, we are back at 107. What it shows is that the harder we go around killing militants, the harder Pakistan tries to push in more within, from within its pool of militants that it creates to India. So what has changed really? over these last 73 years? Has Pakistan abandoned the strategy of trying to bleed India through 1,000 cuts? Well, the clear answer is no. Pakistan continues to train, harbor, control terrorists. It continues to fund them. It continues to support them in every conceivable way. It costs them a fraction of what it costs India to get after those terrorists and kill them. So it's a pretty game for them. And why is it that Pakistan does all that, what it does? I perceive that it has three primary motives. Firstly, this game provides them the means to keep the unfinished agenda of Kashmir on the table. It is their only hope, and that's the second one, to do unto India what India did to them in 1971. And the third part is that it keeps the Indian armed forces and polity immensely occupied. That leaves them little time to actually try anything else against Pakistan. So the challenge remains, and it's here to stay in Kashmir. It's not going to change. It's here to stay in Siachen. So what does India do? It has tried to get Pakistan on the table to talk. Pakistan didn't stop terrorism, and that's why we moved away from the talks. India has tried to get Pakistan blacklisted at the FATF. We bombed them after Uri. We bombed them in Balakot. In strategic terms, if you ask me, these bombings and these trans-LC firings are absolutely inconsequential. It can make a strategic, not. At the tactical level, yes, a local commander may find himself at a higher plane tactically, but not strategically. Strategically, it really doesn't make any difference. So we haven't achieved a great strategic victory after 1971, and it really next to nothing, in terms of change. If I look at Balakot, if I look at post-Uri strikes, yes, we went across the LOC, we hit them hard. But how much difference does it make in terms of achieving change in Pakistan's behavior? And that behavior hasn't undergone any change. So Kashmir continues to be a ground for the budding aspirations of every new Pakistani army chief, every new ISI chief, and his counterparts in India. The time-tested principles on the ground in Kashmir of using the iron fist and the velvet glove seems to have been somehow diluted. And winning hearts and minds, and the strategy which was going around some years back has toned down to an extent. Repealing Article 370, reducing the states of J&K to the status of Union territories is being seen as a victory all over the country, but it's certainly not a military victory, if I may call that. Nothing has changed on the ground. The situation remains the same. The number of deaths due to militants has neither reduced drastically, nor has the sentiments amongst the local, militants, or the recruitment of militants, undergone a drastic amount of change. It's really not changed much. So has the population started supporting India? I think the answer is known to everybody. So it really does matter to me that Pakistan is bleeding India. Whether we bleed Pakistan more than what it bleeds us really is of no concern to us. What it means is that they continue to hurt us. And really, we haven't been able to change that behavior. So what do we do? Well, there is a lot of things that the government has already done in terms of political alignment outside the country, geostrategic positioning, alignment with local regional powers, alignment with international powers and pivoting them against Pakistan, but in terms of effect, there hasn't been much. Coming on to the next neighbor that we have, and that is China. The threat from China is military, it's economic, and it's also geostrategic. With China, the unsettled border position with India provides a ready-made issue to up the ante at any time he wants. Every time there has been a high-profile visit by a Chinese leader, you'll find that there has been a transgression. The recent incursion into Ladakh, the Doklam foray, and what have you, I mean, there have all been, so many of them unreported ones as well, which have tested Indian patience and resolve time and again. And that's what the Chinese are very good at doing. They test you 100 times and see your response. And if you don't respond emphatically, decisively, they take advantage of it. So they have also aligned with their brother-in-arms at Pakistan on multiple occasions, whether it's a veto in the UN, which the Pakistanis have been bailed out with, or the issue of Masood Azhar, which finally went in India's favor, or even the candidature of India in the Security Council. All these have been thorns in the flesh to an otherwise robust relationship, which has economically thrived a lot. And let me tell you, India and China have also collaborated a number of times on various issues when it concerns the West, such as interests in the WTO, such as interests related to climate change. China has continued to provide logistical and ideological support to left-wing insurgency in India. And that's particularly of concern in the Northeast. There's no doubt that as time goes by, India and China will continue to wrestle for economic and geostrategic space in time, within the arena. Conflict may not be directed, but will certainly be indirect. Economically, the two countries are more intertwined than ever. Today, I mean, I don't have the latest statistics for this year, the first 6 months or so, but certainly in 2019, the bilateral trade was close to about $93 billion. And there was a lot of hoo-ha about the bilateral trade having gone down from $95 billion a year earlier to $93 billion in 2019. Well, not a real change if you call that. So $93 billion for a $3 trillion economy is quite a lot of money. For India, the worrying part is that the trade deficit of this, that is about $56 billion, is in favor of the Chinese. And this is what does not augur well for the nation, and India must reduce its reliance on China in a big way and diversify its import basket to mitigate its geopolitical risk. So China is therefore a complex military, economic, and geostrategic challenge and will continue to remain one. India has aligned militarily with the US, with Japan, Vietnam, with Australia, and we have emerged as a viable counterweight to China for the West. The more this perception is strengthened, the more the West will pivot towards India. So it is not only about emerging as a big market to the Western goods, but also about balancing China militarily and strategically. A 70 or 100 years are actually a blip in the lifetime of nations and civilizations. So the border issue, whether unresolved or resolved in our lifetimes, is not going to make much of a difference when it comes to the lifetime of a nation. And issues like these are always negotiated from a point of strength, from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness. So we could wait it out. We could develop the strength. We could, develop the alliances to make sure that we negotiate from a position of strength and not from a position of weakness. The antagonism gives rise to adverse public opinion. And this adverse public opinion over a long time can be disastrous. So are we intending to go to a war with China in the next 50 years? Do we need to build public opinion against China in the next 50 years? So how does India want to pan out the relationship? So that relationship is also influenced to a large degree by our internal audience and the opinion that Indians have around China. So how does India balance China militarily? I feel the way to do is by strengthening our naval and air forces and the tenuous sea lanes of communication and the Chinese dependence on these flocks is a geographical necessity. This is exactly what we can leverage and what we must leverage. Next is India's border with Nepal, and Nepal had been a very worthy ally in the past. Of late, since the time the communist government has come in, there has been a simmering border dispute with Nepal, and which has grabbed the headlines. The recent case where Nepal strongly objected to India constructing a road and the subsequent Lipulekh-Kalapani dispute is a case in point. And in spite of Indian objections, the Nepali parliament has gone ahead and passed a map in the lower house of parliament on Saturday last, unanimously passing the historic second constitution amendment bill, which guaranteed the legal status for the updating of a political map of Nepal, which includes India's territories. And these territories are basically in Uttarakhand, part of Pithoragarh district. And voting in the Pratinidhi Sabha, that is, the House of Representatives in Nepal, came after a long discussion, which included praise from the co-chair of Nepal's Communist Party, which was led by, of course, Prachanda, for the Nepalese democracy, which he said is reversing centuries of diplomatic humiliation. And responding to development, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, had noted that this is an artificial enlargement of claims. It doesn't have any historical evidence, and these are devoid of facts and therefore not tenable. Well, I would say that these territorial disputes stem from the fact that Nepal claims land which is east of the river Kali, which form the country's western borders, and as per Kathmandu's understanding, the river originates from a point which is called Limpiadhura in the higher Himalayas, giving it access to a triangular shape of land which is called the Limpiadhura, Lipulekh and Kalapani triangle. India opposes this notion, and we say that the origin of the river is much further down, and which obviously reduces Nepal's territorial demand. So this is a classic example of how a neighbor who had been in good terms with you has now renegated, has now, the relationship has been, set back. The countering of the Madhesi annexation in the past, and that was in 2015, the land blockade, the deadlock over the constitution of Nepal, all were factors which have led to what is today. And if you ask me frankly, our foreign policy with Nepal has not been the most admirable. I think we could have done much more. We have done much more in the past, but things aren't looking so good now, and we really need to do a lot. Culturally, we're much closer to them. Geographically, we're much closer to them. Remember, Tibet is not a populated, quote unquote, place of China. China is all concentrated, away from Tibet. That's one of the rarest, in terms of population all over China. So India has a geographical advantage, no doubt. China is quickly and in a very fast manner trying to negate that advantage by building communications and lots of things. I mean, railway lines and road communication, etc., to negate that advantage. And India must move even faster to do that. India's challenge and India's threats to its borders would not be complete without discussing Afghanistan. While it doesn't share a border with India, but it is of a great concern to us. And before I do that, I would like to mention that I'm not specifically discussing Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Bhutan, because we have excellent relations with them. And with these three countries, India doesn't see any kind of threat, and both geopolitically as well as culturally, we're quite well aligned. And therefore, I don't find a reason why I should really dwell too much on that. With Afghanistan, Afghanistan's National Security Advisor was in Delhi, during which he addressed the Raisina dialogue, I think in the month of January. And he hailed India as a key partner of this country, sharing the vision that a peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan is all dependent on the good work that India has been doing with them. Well, Ahmadullah asserted that a ceasefire is necessary and how it was required for the development of Afghanistan. And the ceasefire that we're talking about is the ceasefire with the Taliban. The Taliban, the same Taliban, which was an adversary of the US, which is now on the negotiating table and is on the verge of operationalizing a ceasefire. So what India has, and there have been so many discussions on whether Afghanistan's ceasefire with the Taliban is good for India or not. Well, I must say here that whether it's good for India or not, it's going to come, because the US is behind it, and the US sees that as part of its interests. It sees there is no way that it can keep itself engaged in Afghanistan for a long time, and therefore to honor the fact that it needs to get its forces back, there is going to be a ceasefire in place. And when it does, what it does change on the ground is that the Afghan Taliban no longer stays there as an adversary and becomes part of the power sharing arrangement, which is yet to be worked out, of course, in mainland Afghanistan. And we know who backs the Pakistani Taliban. The Afghan Taliban is a country cousin of the Pakistanis. So there is no difference between the fact that the Afghan politics will be controlled in Islamabad. And when I say it will be controlled in Islamabad, it will be controlled in the general headquarters in Rawalpindi. And that is the difference. You have an entity which is adversarial towards India, controlling affairs in another country. And there's no doubt that it'll try to make the most of it. Where do all those soldiers go who have been fighting against the regular Afghan army? Just last week, 400 Afghan security personnel were killed by the Taliban. And this is when a talk is going on about having a ceasefire. So that, I feel, is a much bigger challenge than even the recent incursions of the Chinese at Galwan Valley. It really overshadows this. India has invested a lot in Afghanistan. We have given them helicopters, built dams for them, we've built parliamentary buildings, hospitals, and what have you. Close to $3 billion, and that's not chump change. That's quite a lot of money for a country like India. In fact, India is the largest regional donor for Afghanistan. And all this will come to naught in case India doesn't stay invested in the future of Afghanistan. And the way to stay invested in the future of Afghanistan is not by staying in your barracks. I feel the only way that you can stay invested in Afghanistan is by putting boots on the ground. India cannot stand on the sidelines and hope like hell that everything goes well and the Afghan security forces will take care of themselves and the Afghan Taliban will be kept at bay. Although they will be part of the broad power sharing arrangement, I think it is too much to ask from our neighbor in the West. He's already articulated that Afghanistan provides it with strategic depth. He's already articulated that Afghanistan is the reason why the US really allied with them in the first place, to counter Russia's incursions into Afghanistan. So it wants to be where it is. If it wants to have a prominent role in Afghanistan, there is no way that India can counter it without really being there itself. And therefore, the illusion that merely by spending some money, and by sending some arms to the Afghan army, we're going to achieve everything, I think is living in a fool's paradise. It's just an illusion. We cannot afford to do that. It's really a matter of time before you find the Afghan Taliban, which has, by the way, professed that it doesn't want to target Kashmir. It doesn't want. It says that Kashmir is an internal matter of India. And the Afghanistan Taliban has said that, which really I have no faith over. I don't expect the Afghan Taliban to really stand as guarantee when the Mujahideens now start traveling towards India and start creating and fomenting trouble in J&K or any place else. So I think it is time to act, and I think it's time to really position forces on the ground and boots on ground. Have your assets on ground, whether it is air assets or whether it is in terms of the armed forces. Excuse me. Coming on to with this, I broadly finished the external challenges. I'll briefly dwell on the internal challenges as well before we can have the Q&A session. And Indian politics has only revolved around elections. From one election to the other election, the entire discourse of the nation is hijacked, as if there is nothing more important than to actually elect a parliament, elect the parliament, or elect the legislative assembly. And certainly their activities in the country related to security are put on the back burner. And I think that is not something which really should happen. It should be right there up front, and the issues should be divorced from the fact that the polity is changing hands. So firstly, India has a fledgling Maoist or Naxal issue. It continues to remain an issue even after years and years of intervention, and we have had state forces being raised. We have had state armed constabulary being used for it, to tackle it. We have had the CRPF being used in a very major way against Naxals. And we have had, of course, a lot of casualties also of the forces, while people have laid down their lives fighting for and against, fighting against the Naxals. So why is it that we have not been able to overcome this issue? I think part of the problem is developmental, part of the problem is social, and of course, part of the problem is also external funding and moral support and ideological support, which has really not allowed this simmering issue to be solved for once for all. And can you imagine that these issues are occurring in the hinterland of the country? It's not that they're occurring on the border. In fact, there are states which are bordering Bangladesh or bordering Nepal and don't have a Maoist insurgency, whereas you have hinterland states like say Chhattisgarh or parts of Karnataka, parts of Andhra, which have fledgling Maoist problem. So I think we really need a unified command structure instead of trying to break response state by state. Have every state have its own way around it. Response structure is universal. The problem has also compounded in a very big way because of other issues, and these are like the sleepover problems of yesterday. So developmental issues don't get fixed, and developmental issues lead to discontentment on the ground, which increases the ranks of the Maoists, allows them to buy recruits, allows them to entice recruits, and have their ranks swell over. Obviously, they can carry out those many operations more than they could earlier. There is another issue which has really been at the forefront in the last about, you can say, 5 or 6 months, and that was essentially the NRC, the CAA and the NRC. It's a big problem in India. While we did see the CAA being passed by Parliament, but CAA being introduced, we didn't say that it was really welcomed by everybody in India, and there has been a lot of challenges associated with CAA and NRC. And I think part of the problem is in the way that the narrative has been painted, rather than the issue of CAA itself. The way it has been painted has been slightly negative, and I would say not slightly. In fact, I'm being liberal towards it. It's been quite negative. If you look at the NRC in Assam, well, it cost the Indian exchequer roughly 1,600 crore rupees, 1,600 crores. And if I were to conduct an NRC for Assam again, it would cost roughly the same amount, 1,600 crores. And what's the population of Assam? Well, about 3.5 crores. And what happens if I were to conduct this NRC for 135 crores? The amount of money that it would be required to do this NRC or implement this NRC is it's too much. It's too much. It's beyond what India as a nation can afford. The CAA, on the other hand, is why I say it's blown out of proportions is because it's impacting a very small constituency, but it hits at the heart of the core belief of a constituency. And that's where the conflict is. I think there has to be a lot of reconciliation, because internal strife over a period of time and can lead to social unrest, and social unrests are not good for nations. These are internal challenges, and these internal challenges must be met. The nation has to move on. It can't get entangled in this CAA, NRC business forever. Social unrest and the cost of a divided society is too much for our nation to bear. Then, of course, we have COVID-19. And I wanted to cover this last. That COVID-19 has come like a big hole on a ship. It can really sink even the largest armada. So COVID-19 and the job losses of 2020 are the talk of the town now. The migrant crisis which has been ushered, will it lead to social unrest in times to come? Because you have suddenly seen migration of people back to their hometowns and villages, and there is no work. How long can the government feed? How long can government keep up with its direct benefit transfer schemes? How long can we give employment in Manrega? And we give it to all. So these are challenges which are much bigger, much larger than the wasteful, activities that we could, worry about. So migrant crisis, COVID-19, economic fallout, these are all interrelated, and therefore 2020 presents itself as a very challenging year. As we move ahead, and as the number of pandemic patients rise, pandemic affected patients rise, so will the cost on the healthcare system, so will the cost on our economy, and therefore there is a need to do that is by ensuring that the economic system functions at its optimal capacity and it's not constrained by the lockdowns. So it's a tightrope walk. There are no clear-cut solutions. You have one central government which gives out an advisory, says, okay, you open up everything, lock, unlock, lock, unlock, and then finally we are all unlocked. And then suddenly another state, and I was reading just today that Tamil Nadu has again gone on to announce a lockdown, a total lockdown again. So I think the issue requires a unified response more than what it required 3 months ago. Today, the response is quite divided, and that is itself a challenge. It requires money to flow in, and that still is a challenge. So challenging it is, whether it's the locust, whether it's the cyclone, whether the recent earthquake, I think there was one yesterday in Gujarat as well. So the year 2020 comes with its own set of challenges, and India would do well to cut down its losses, focus on specific, tangible issues rather than getting entangled in useless, useless talk and useless unrest, which only undermines its development and its desire to grow into a great power. I finished, I think, and I would be open to any questions that I may be able to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Jafri, for your very insightful talk on the challenges that India faces in the frontiers as well as internally. I thank you for joining this session presented by Tillotoma Foundation, and I also thank all the viewers. Thank you.